Meta has single-handedly progressed VR more than any other company. Without them, we wouldn't have standalone VR, inside-out tracking, or any AAA VR games really. There's no denying that they've carried VR immensely, but I actually think this has been mostly a bad thing for long-term improvements in VR. Going back to the release of the Oculus Rift S and Oculus Quest, those headsets sold pretty damn well, especially the original Quest. I think the Rift S was the next stage in VR's natural development with inside-out tracking, creating a headset that could be sold at a profit with its cheap plastic and other glaring issues like the robot mic.
So this is my Oculus mic, and a mic sound.
But the Quest was a huge jump in comparison. OLED, inside-out tracked, standalone VR for just $400. This device was insanely subsidized in order to get the mass market into VR. Hell, to this day, even for the same launch price of $400, no headset has been able to feature standalone capabilities and OLED, which I think just shows how far Meta was willing to push back then. This did accomplish the goal of getting lots of people into VR, but they did so in a way that artificially boosted numbers instead of letting VR grow on its own. Then, with the Quest 2, they doubled system performance, cut the OLED, and shaved off $100. There hasn't been an actual competent headset for $299 since, let alone a standalone one. This headset pretty much set a gold standard that for $299, you need to match or exceed the Quest 2's capabilities. This was pretty much impossible for any company to accomplish in 2020 and planted the seeds for a new problem where headset expectations and price would be pretty much impossible to meet in due time. If you look at hardware today, Meta is working on making VR profitable now, so the Quest 4 will likely be an insanely high and unreachable price, especially with the current RAM crisis. Unfortunately, Meta never slowed down with these exceeding hardware expectations until right now. So the Quest 3 with inside-out body tracking, inside-out tracking without rings, pancake lenses, powerful standalone hardware, and colored pass-through have become sort of expected for $500. And now the price of that went up, and even the Quest 3 is $600 now. Take a look at the Steam frame. People are upset about the lack of colored pass-through. But Valve seems to be sidestepping this problem by implementing other features like foveated streaming and full finger tracking. But other companies have had to rely on making top-notch premium headsets instead, like the Big Screen Beyond, because making a budget VR option will never compete with what Meta is able to subsidize for, or at least with what they were previously willing to subsidize for. Meta is no longer willing to bleed money anymore. They're going to be selling their next headset at a profit, which creates a reality where the Quest 4 can pretty much never innovate enough to be worth the upwards of $1,000 it may cost, since it won't be subsidized. Instead of letting this industry grow organically and let expectations be set with what hardware can actually be made for which price, the expectation and hope for what VR should be right now is way higher than what can actually be achieved without Meta pumping billions more into it. Meta has also created the same problem with software. By funding AAA studios and giving an infinite pocket of money for other studios to grab from, the expectation for what VR games should be has shot through the roof. The only time a game has been able to naturally match these expectations without Meta's money has been Boneworks or Vertigo 2. So many great VR games have had the financial aid of Meta, some you probably didn't even realize. So many titles likely would have never existed without Meta. And that sounds like a good thing on paper. It sounds like Meta's helping us. But in reality, it's done more long-term damage for the sake of better short-term performance. We've had these higher budget, Meta-funded games for so long that they've become the standard. People want VR games that are essentially impossible to make right now without big budgets. Big budgets that don't exist without Meta, in which they're backing out now, so these games pretty much can't exist. And for the few who do try to make these bigger VR games, they become unprofitable games and lead to studio shutdowns. Just look at the team at Vertigo Games. One of their studios is shutting down, and the other is trying to desperately port some games to flat in hopes of staying afloat. And for consumers like us, we're left wanting more because it's what we've had for so long. I'm left desperately wanting a game like Batman Arkham Shadow or a sequel to it, and even though it sold incredibly well for a VR game, It was never going to be profitable in the first place in this current market, and will probably never see a sequel for decades, if ever. Now, that studio is pretty much shut down. Because Meta didn't let this medium grow organically, new games like Vertigo 2 and Boneworks weren't as meaningful as they probably should have been. Of course, they were still gigantic impacts and people love these games, but I think it should have been more so. Vertigo 2 especially has gone majorly under the radar, but I believe in a world where Meta isn't dumping millions into VR games, Vertigo 2 would have been one of the biggest VR games ever, since it would exist in a world where it stands out as an especially excellent VR game amongst a wave of way smaller scale VR games. Instead, it has to go against these other games with a lot of funding from Meta, which again sounds good on paper. We get more and better games, but Meta can't bleed money in an unprofitable market forever, and we're now seeing the consequence of trying to skip the organic part. VR was on a steady, proper, natural rise before the Facebook acquisition of Oculus. With headsets like the Vive and Oculus Rift, people would see VR from YouTubers and think, whoa, that technology seems awesome, but I can't afford it. And as time went on, it would have naturally gotten cheaper and more available to people. I remember the main reason I was interested in a PC for gaming was because of VR. But because we woke up one day and skipped straight to standalone inside-out tracking for VR, millions finally did get to play VR, but because we skipped the part of naturally working our way there, we finally reached this inevitable doom in hindsight where VR can't keep up with the rapid, unrealistic expectations Meta set for it. Why are headsets so expensive? And where are the big games? We were never supposed to have these things in the first place. Instead of people seeing cool, organically made, awesome looking VR games made with passion and thinking, oh, that looks fun, we instead got big, unprofitable AAA games, which massively undermined the realistically possible VR games we did get. I was excited when I heard a sequel to Job Simulator was coming with Vacation Simulator. I had 1,000 hours on Pavlov, which thrived on community-made, passion-filled maps, while being fairly bare bones at its core. I remember playing Boneworks, then trying to play Pavlov and thinking, wow, I need every VR game to have physics now. Interactions feel so awful now. And because Boneworks did it naturally, new VR games could actually implement at least this base level of physical interactions. That side of VR, when made organically, has room to grow and improve in a way that can actually match expectations. When we skip that part and go straight to AAA titles with unprofitable funding, we create this issue where people feel like VR games should be bigger than they can actually be without Meta's funding. VR as a medium has terrifyingly almost become entirely dependent on Meta bleeding money into it. And with them focusing on making things profitable now, things are looking pretty bleak. If Owlchemy announced Vacation or Job Simulator 2 today, I would hardly care at all. Because I've played much bigger games and feel like I wouldn't be satisfied with another game like that without some serious bigger changes. That's a totally natural part of a progressing medium, and that's okay. But because we took this giant shortcut, Owlchemy has pretty much no chance at actually delivering a game that would actually feel like a modern VR title. And to those of you who are saying, oh well, I'd be interested, they actually did release a new game, Dimensional Double Shift, but you probably haven't even heard of it, despite it being multiplayer and most importantly, free. This game would have been a way bigger deal in an organically grown market. It could have reached the popularity the original Job Simulator did, but in this market, it never stood a chance. With Meta backing down, we're left with hardware that's too expensive and games that aren't good enough to sell VR. So what happens now? Is this it? Does VR die here once again like it has throughout the years many times before modern VR? Well, as much as I hate to say it, kind of. This era of VR as we know it, with big Meta exclusives, unprofitable yet affordable hardware, comes to an end. Without Meta pumping millions into VR, we no longer see VR skipping major hurdles and jumping straight into big games. And that sounds awful, but I believe this to be the opposite of what has been happening, and ultimately, I see this as a good thing in the long run. VR can only grow organically once again. This is bad short term. We're going to have some pretty shitty games and things aren't going to live up to how good they have been in the past. But long term, this is excellent. New VR games that don't rely on big, huge, unrealistic, and unprofitable budgets, games made with passion and love for the medium. Those will be the ones at the forefront of interest in VR. Instead of everyone focusing on the big AAA release that could never last and be sustainable in this current market, it'll be VR games that can actually sustain themselves. For those of you who miss what we called old VR, we're essentially reverting back to that. It's like an old era of the internet, where it was driven pretty much entirely by the community before major studios considered it profitable and jumped in. The major studios part will happen naturally, just in due time. VR is also likely going to be a lot less accessible for a while, and that's okay. It was never supposed to be this accessible this fast in the first place. The budget of VR games going forward is going to be a lot smaller, and that's also okay. We were never supposed to be at a point where a new Batman Arkham game was a VR exclusive, and stuff like that isn't going to happen for a while anymore. We're back to phase 1. But this isn't a complete reset. All of Meta's work hasn't been in vain. There's now a used market of VR headsets that make getting into VR more accessible than before, but this time, naturally, VR games are going to gain popularity, slowly, but naturally. Not by being a new big title in an existing franchise, but by being unique and special in their own way, like how Beat Saber and VR Chat had major interest in it years before Meta pushed everything into high gear. It was done through passion and cool indie devs with cool ideas, not an infinite budget. Community-made stuff by passionate people will get the attention it properly deserves now. And yes, there will be less people interested in playing VR, but if it gets its chance to grow on its own, no shortcuts this time, VR should naturally reach that mainstream goal Meta so desperately tried to artificially skip into. If you miss or feel like you missed out on that old era of VR, where everything was essentially community driven, there was funny custom maps in Pavlov, indie gems like Beat Saber and Superhot, that era when VR felt like its own small corner of the internet, filled with people passionate about the medium, I believe now is your chance to experience it one last time. The pre-owned market is more affordable than ever. The PSVR 2 frequently goes on crazy sales, and you can find totally usable Quest 2s for like $100 on eBay. This is one of the few benefits we can take advantage of during this era of VR's essentially lowest point. This is basically your second chance to experience the natural and honest growth of VR again. And if things actually grow naturally this time, no million-dollar shortcuts, when VR is eventually in the mass market and AAAs do invest into it, this starting point won't ever happen again. The same way something like this can never happen for flat games because of how big they've become naturally, the same will eventually be true for VR, assuming Meta doesn't decide to come back and become an infinite wallet again, which after the first time, I don't think they will. VR is about to be at a super low point. Less games, more expensive hardware, etc. But ultimately, at the end of this, with support and love from the community, just like last time, VR will get to its new highest point. One made honestly this time. One made by the influence of passionate developers and people. Not one that tries to skip the process by throwing money at the wall. I believe Meta ultimately hurt VR in the long run, and is the reason for this sort of crash. But with them finally backing out, we're free to do things the right way this time, and I couldn't be more excited for what that means for the eventual future. Hey, but remember, all of that is a theory. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one where I talk about why base stations die. It's semi-similar and a pretty good watch if you like this one. You can get 10% off the entire Quest store using the link in the description. It's the best way to support the channel and help me stay afloat in an era where VR is about to be at its absolute lowest. Again, that's a theory. Hyping the video also boosts views to an insane degree, so I would appreciate that a lot. With all of that out of the way, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one, fat bitches. Lops and kisses!